Hello Magic players, Maelstrom MTG here. Today we're talking about some more budget modern, and today's deck is very, very gross. We're actually talking about Eggs. Now, Eggs originally was a blue-white deck that ended up receiving a ban because it was so annoying to play against. It was also a very hard deck to play. And so even if you knew what you were doing, the deck could take probably like 20 minutes to combo out. And so for that reason, they actually ended up banning Second Sunrise. The deck ended up shifting away from white, and then they ended up banning KCI. So then people were like, okay, maybe we can replace KCI with Semblance Anvil. And then Mox Opal was banned, and people gave up on the deck. Well, I'm back again with an attempt to revive Eggs. Now, I want to say that every time I attempted to get gameplay for this deck, once my opponents realized what I was doing, they conceded. So, either that or they just beat me so quickly that it didn't matter. More often than not, though, it was really they just conceded. They recognized KCI, or they recognized Eggs immediately, and they did not want a part of it. They conceded. Now, this is not a very fun deck to play against, but it is a very fun deck to play because you're constantly on the grind. There are no easy wins with this deck. You really do have to know how to play the deck. You have to play it. Even if you're just like at your desk and then just have the deck shuffling it up and playing it, even if you're just playing all by yourself, you have to get used to comboing out. You have to try to learn what different paths you can do. Because it's not like Vannifar where you go 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, 4 drop, 5 drop, and then win the game. It's closer to Storm, where any given game, like, you could fizzle. You could just fizzle. Maybe you don't draw all the cantrips that you need. Maybe you don't draw all the rituals you need. Maybe you don't get Gifts and Given or Past in Flames. Maybe it's just hard. Now, that being said, I have still had a really good amount of success with this deck. So, I decided to share it with you, and I think this is really the best you can get for under $100. Now, I have put a lot of time into this deck. I put a lot of effort, and I'm going to try to explain not necessarily the game plan. I'll explain the win con and then general gist of the deck, and then I'll explain what each of your cards do and what they do for the deck. Because I can't tell you, okay, you're going to do this, and then that, because your game plan will change every single game. So, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to explain Semblance Anvil says spells you cast that share the type with the exiled card cost 2 less to cast. And what that means is imprint. So when this card enters the battlefield, you can exile a non-land card from your hand. If you do, anything with that type is going to be costing 2 less. So the thing that you're going to be exiling from your hand is it's going to be an artifact. So what that's going to do is it's going to make all of your artifacts cost 2 less, and the only artifacts in the deck that cost 3 mana or more are Scrap Trawler and Semblance Anvil itself. So the moment you get Semblance Anvil on turn 3, I know people might say, oh, turn 3, that's so late, but let's say you play, and that's such a bad effect for turn 3. Well, if you think about it, turn 3 you play this, and then you play the rest of your hand. That doesn't sound bad to me at all. So we have Semblance Anvil as the replacement for KCI. It's what legitimizes the deck. But also Mox Opal was banned, so we no longer have that insane amount of ramp. But what we will have is we will be replacing it with something that doesn't try to fill the spot of Mox Opal. It just tries to do something completely different. So in replacing Mox Opal, we do have Emery, Lurker of the Loch, which will cost 1 less for each artifact you control. So it does allow you to kind of ramp in, but only to this spell. Then you're going to mill 4 cards of your library. and then you can tap it to choose an artifact from your graveyard, and you can cast it this turn. So this allows you to cast some of those artifacts from your graveyard, and if you have Semblance Anvil out, then it's going to probably cost you 0 mana. But if you want to cast Semblance Anvil from your graveyard in order to start trying to combo out, then Emery is definitely a way you can do this if your opponent makes you discard this, or maybe they destroy it while it's on the board. Now, real quick, I'm going to say how we actually win Game 1. Game 1, we win through Grinding Station. So you can tap it's a 2-mana artifact, you can tap it to sacrifice an artifact, and then you can mill target player 3 cards. Then whenever an artifact comes into play, you can untap Grinding Station. So what this is going to do is this is going to allow us to the early game mill ourselves so that we can get cards in our graveyard. We have a lot of graveyard synergy with our deck, and then we can play things from our graveyard, untapping our Grinding Station, tapping our Grinding Station, sacrifice the things, get them back from the graveyard, and go infinite. The way we actually, and then eventually, when we've established the combo in our own graveyard, we're going to start milling our opponent, and then we can mill them out completely, and they will end up losing the game from it. So the way we establish an infinite combo with Grinding Station is by having Semblance Anvil out with an artifact exiled underneath. So Mirror Retriever, a 2-drop, will cost 0 mana. Then whenever it dies, you return another target artifact from your graveyard to your hand. So the requirement to win with an infinite combo here is a Mirror Retriever on the board or in your hand, a Mirror Retriever in the graveyard, and a Semblance Anvil and Grinding Station both on the board. And so if you have all of those things set up, then what you can do is you can play your Mirror Retriever, and then you sacrifice it with Grinding Station. You will mill your opponent 3. When Mirror Retriever dies, you'll return your other Mirror Retriever to your hand. You'll cast it, untapping Grind Station when it enters the battlefield. And then what will happen is you will sacrifice it again to mill your opponent 3 more cards. Mirror Retriever dies, bring the one from your graveyard back to your hand, play it again, untap Grinding Station, go infinite. Once you do any infinite combo 3 times in a row, you've established infinite. That's the requirement, 3 times in a row. And so you've established infinite, so you can just tell your opponent to mill their entire deck if you're playing in paper. If you're playing in online, it's going to be much more of a grind. It's probably like Storm though. At a certain point, they'll just be like, "Yeah, you win." But quite often, once they saw Semblance Anvil, Grinding Station, or Mirror Retriever, they started realizing what I was trying to do. Now, I'm not trying to get my opponent to concede against me, but it's what happens quite often. Then we have Scrap Trawler. Whenever Scrap Trawler enters whenever it or another artifact you control is put in a graveyard from the battlefield, return to your hand target artifact in your graveyard with lesser mana cost. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to play this and then sacrifice it with Grinding Station to go grab our Mirror Retrievers maybe, because Mirror Retriever is another way. Like if we mill out 2 Mirror Retrievers, that's okay. Let's just get our Scrap Trawler and then let's just return it. If we have an Emery, like I would be down to just I guess Emery you could play your Mirror Retriever anyway, but you can always play Scrap Trawler, and Scrap Trawler can make you get your Mirror Retriever, and then you sack your Mirror Retriever, so you'll return an artifact and a 1 or 0 drop. Now, Scrap Trawler is really nice. It does combo with things like it allows us to grab those Darksteel Citadels. It allows us to grab that from our graveyard if we decide to sack Darksteel Citadel even with our Grinding Station. Next up is we do have Ancient Stirrings to try to help filter our deck. It's one of the reasons why I have accepted that we're running 3 Grinding Stations. It allows us to filter our deck for anything we need. Galvanic Blast as a removal, or even a way to win the game if we're going against someone who is doesn't have a very big board presence. We do only have 10 creatures, 3 of which are legendary, and then they're not very big. But I've swung in a few times with Scrap Trawler if I can't sometimes they'll just bring in so much graveyard hate so you'll just have to try to swing in with Scrap Trawler. But Galvanic Blast can deal a little extra damage to them. Maybe they're playing a Death Shadow deck, and once they see that you're milling them, they don't care about their life total anymore. They'll go down to 2. They'll go down to 3, even 4. And so if they do that, then 100% you can just kill them with Galvanic Blast. Next up is Engineered Explosives. Sunburst, we have a total of 5 colors in our mana base. So what that will allow us to do is it'll allow us to really be able to hit up to 5 permanent, 5 CMC in our deck. We only have 18 lands, but we're drawing a lot of cards. We have potential to add any color to our mana base, so Sunburst will allow us to use that. Basically what it says is Sunburst enters the battlefield with X charge counters, where X is the different types of mana spent on it. So if I cast it for 2 mana, it being blue and black, it'll enter with 2 charge counters on it. And then it says pay 2 mana, sack it, destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on it. So this is very much like Blast Zone, but it's an artifact. Next up, it's also a 0-drop, so it allows us to just play it. So like we could technically explosives, island, Emery on turn 1. Like, we have other 0-drops in the deck, but I just needed to say that. Next up is another 0-drop, Welding Jar. Sacrifice it or generate target artifact. This is a very nice way, if we don't have Emery, to be able to have our Grinding Station or Semblance Anvil or even Scrap Trawler stay on the board. it's really nice. Chromatic Star, actually, I'm also going to mention Terrarion at this point. Terrarion enters tapped, but it can tap to pay 2, tap, sack, add 2 of any combination. It filters our mana. Chromatic Star is pay 1 mana, tap, sack, add 1 mana of any color. It also filters our mana, but both of those have clauses that are pretty neat that say when it's put in a graveyard from the battlefield, draw a card. And so that means that we can sacrifice it with Grinding Station, not even to itself. And when that happens, we can easily just get some extra value drawing cards. So those cards are in there because it allows us to filter our deck even more. It allows us to draw an insane amount of cards. And it allows us to even filter our mana if we need to cast that Emery, if we need to cast that Ancient Stirrings, or even Galvanic Blast. Now, I worked really hard on the mana base, but really, like, those cards right there will do most of the heavy lifting if your mana fails you. Next up is actually I want to really quickly talk about Ichor Wellspring because it does a very similar thing. It does not filter your mana, but when it enters the battlefield or is put in a graveyard from the battlefield, you can draw a card. So that's going to do is that's going to allow us to get immediate value, sack with Grinding Station, and then get more value later. This is more of something you can play. Like, you can play Chromatic Star in the early game and still get value, but if you play Terrarion before you have a Grinding Station out, it might feel kind of bad. But if you have an Ichor Wellspring out, that's 2 mana, draw a card, later you're guaranteed to draw a card. That's amazing. Anyway, next up is the only artifact in the deck, it seems, that I haven't talked about, which is Pyrite Spellbomb, which is a 1-drop whenever... No, it's not a whenever card. It's a 1-drop, pay a red, sack, deal 2 damage to any target. This is one of our ways we can also deal with creatures on the board. It's a way we can add a little bit of removal while also having an artifact in our deck. We want to maximize the number of artifacts in our deck so that we can increase the viability of Grinding Station as well as Semblance Anvil and Emery and Scrap Trawler and Mirror Retriever. The more and more I go, really, everything in our deck cares about artifacts. So also you can sack, pay 1, and draw a card. So if you don't need to deal that 2 damage, you can draw a card. But with all the bringing back from the graveyard with things like Scrap Trawler and Mirror Retriever, sometimes what will end up happening is you can take a slower paced game, not necessarily go all in one turn, and just keep spellbombing them. You can just keep spellbombing them, or maybe you take a slower approach of Grinding Station trying to mill them, but maybe you spellbomb all of their creatures. Anyway, that's all of the, well, actually, we do have Ancient Stirrings to filter through our cards, and Galvanic Blast for that removal, and possibly Wincon. I don't know if I actually, like, these cards are really nice. I'm going to be honest, they're really undervalued. Buried Ruin is a budget Academy Ruins. It's a way for us to return our artifacts to our hand if we're wanting to, like, basically do an Emery but with a land. Crack Crown Pathway, you only really need one or the other. This is for you to be able to say, okay, turn 1, I'm casting Ancient Stirrings. One could argue that you could also just play the blue-green one, but really, this one was actually what I ended up needing the most. And there are honestly other green lands in the deck. We do have Darksteel Citadel as an artifact, so we are able to get it. We are able to get it back with Scrap Trawler. We're able to get it with Mirror Retriever. We're able to sacrifice it with Grinding Station. We're able to put it underneath with no, that's actually not on land card. I've never actually done that. I just thought on that on the spot. We do have Glimmer Void, which says at the beginning of your end step, if you control no artifacts, sacrifice it. Tap, add 1 of any color. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to just play literally any artifact on turn 1 and have this stay on the board. This is going to be Rainbow Mana, enters untapped. It's just very, very strong for what it is. Next up is Yavimaya Coast. It's where our blue and green comes in. I didn't want the pathway here because honestly, for this pathway, it's really red or green. You don't really need both. Where in this deck, you will want blue and green. You want to be able to cast your Stirrings and your Emeries more consistently than your pathways. So though there are 4 pathways and 3 coasts, the 3 coasts will provide all the mana you really need. Now, someone brought up to me that, hey, why aren't you running Spire of Industry? And Spire of Industry is actually not in here because you're already cutting it close. You're trying to combo out on a later turn. You can't be losing that life. You really just can't be losing that life. You don't have enough problems with your mana base to be able to say, yeah, I need it. So this is really what you want to run anyway. But it is a valid consideration if you're not in an aggressive metagame, but we are right now. Next up is Tormod's Crypt, a 0-drop artifact. Allows us to, we could argue that we want to play things like Relic or we don't want to play Relic, but play things like Soul Guide Lantern, but Tormod's Crypt is a 0-drop, and it fits in the deck, slides in much more easily. Mana Leak as a way, you can replace this with Galvanic Blast. You can bring out the blast, bring in the Mana Leaks against combo, even sometimes control, but also just any time that that Galvanic Blast won't come in handy, Mana Leak will. Maybe you need to power up that Galvanic Blast by adding in some Shrapnel Blasts. So you take out your Grinding Stations, bring in Shrapnel Blasts. So your opponents are going to bring in Artifact Destruction, Graveyard Hate maybe, but you'll bring in Shrapnel Blast, and then suddenly they're taking an insane amount of damage from Shrapnel Blast. Sorcerer's Spyglass is kind of a budget version of Pithing Needle, which is already fairly budget, but it's really in here because you want to be able to just make it so they can't cast things, not cast things, activate abilities that make it pesky for you. And Gearper Aether Grid as another thing you might consider bringing in if you are not planning on killing them with Grinding Station. This is something where, like, if you're gonna do this, you might consider taking out your anvils even. So I could see take out 4 anvils, take out 3 Grinding Stations, bring in 2 Gearper, bring in 4 Shrapnel Blast, you could even bring in Sorcerer's Spyglass or Mana Leak there. Anyway, that's the deck. It's a very hard deck to play. I'm gonna be honest. I really tried to get some gameplay, but it was very hard to be able to play a full game. Anyway, if you like the deck, let me know below. If you think there are any other artifacts that didn't make the cut, please let me know below. And if you want to see more content like this, please hit that subscribe, and you'll get notifications for when my next video is out. I do deck techs like this every day. Anyway, I will see you next time.